So let me talk a little bit about information systems in Latin America, and probably try to open a discussion rather than tell you what the trends and research opportunities are. So we need to acknowledge that our discipline starts with the computer, right? It all starts with computing, and at the very beginning, the only discipline that existed out there was computing. Before that, it was mathematics. So we have been specializing throughout the years as time passes. And once we discovered that computers could be used for business purposes, then the information systems discipline started. So what's the sequence here? We start with mathematics and mechanical engineering, and from then on, computer science arises, and arises considering computer science as the most mathematical and most scientific area of computing. And then when we decide that we can use that science to build gadgets, then we develop computer engineering. Once we decide the gadgets can be used for business, then we come into place. Information systems is an applied area, an applied discipline of computing to the organizations. And from then on, we have other disciplines like software engineering developing from it, because at the very beginning, information systems was only for software development, and then it became more of an administrative discipline. So, what's the case of Mexico? In Mexico, we have to go back in history and think that the first computer was installed at my university, at the National University of Mexico, back in 1958. Then the first computer center, as such, was built in the National Polytechnic Institute in the 60s, and the first computer at the Monterrey Tech was in 61 as well. Then the first undergrad program that was for computer systems was at ITESM back in 1969. And the first in information systems as such was in 1971, also at Monterrey Tech. So the first master's program, however, was the National Polytechnic Institute. So that gives us a very good idea of how things are developing very slowly, departing from math, departing from engineering, going into information systems back in the 1970s. But the amazing thing is that from the 70s to our generation, there has been very little development on it. And people do not understand the difference between the disciplines. If you ask an employer uh, what needs do they have in terms of the different disciplines of computers, they don't even understand what those are. So they think everything is the same. So if they hire somebody from information systems or they hire somebody from computer engineering, they expect them to do the same. And that is not, or should not be the case. Also, we have a lost generation back in the 80s in Mexico because of the brain drain. There was absolutely no incentive for people who would do a master's or a doctorate to stay in Mexico. And they would go to Europe, they would go to the United States, and they would stay there. And we have a lot of friends, Alexander would not let me lie, who live there, who are very active in the Latin American Association, and they are Latin Americans, but they do live elsewhere. They don't live in the region. Uh, we have sort of a recovery back in the 90s and the 2000s because there were some incentives put in place. But nowadays, we only have about 400, a little over 400 PhDs in computer areas, and most of them are in computer science, and a lot of them are in artificial intelligence. And I wonder, what do they do? Because natural intelligence doesn't come very handy, and artificial intelligence much worse, right? So there are newcomers. So now we have other disciplines coming on, like mechatronics, digital art and animation, business technology. So it's hard to understand where one discipline ends and the other one starts. And we become a lot more multidisciplinary, right? Especially all those things about animation, digital art, where how much it is a business career, how much it is an art career, or how much it is a computer career. So it's difficult to draw the lines between the different ones. And it's hard also to identify what the future of the discipline is going to be. If it's going to be super specializing, or on the contrary, is going to become something more comprehensive, back to multidisciplinary. So are we into an identity crisis? Probably yes. The information systems discipline is not very well defined, and it's not exactly at its prime in the United States or in any other of the, say, first world countries, and much less it is in ours. So it's very hard to draw the line also to let people know that we are not a second class discipline in the computers area. On the contrary, we should be the ones paying the other ones. In Latin America, we have plenty of programs that are equivalent to management information systems, but they give them all the names that we can imagine. And most commonly, though, even though they are management information systems, they are hosted in the engineering schools rather than in the business schools. There are some in the business schools, of course, but it's difficult for people to think that computers are not related to the hard areas. And we have plenty also of technical and associate degrees, and not necessarily an undergrad major, but rather minor degrees, associate degrees, and some master's programs that are related to IT management. Particularly in IS, we can count the programs probably with one hand, and for the doctoral degrees. And when they exist, they probably develop more the software engineering sense. They are on the hard computer information systems area rather than management information systems. And for instance, in Mexico, there are only two, but only one is related to a school of business. So it's really hard to find them. In Mexico City, you can't find any, which is the funny thing. Most of the things that happen in Mexico City. We're very centralized. However, in the doctoral area, we don't have doctorates in information systems in the Mexico City area. There used to be one related to a doctoral degree in management at Monterrey Tech, but it disappeared. And honestly, it was not very good. So we also have a problem of enrollment versus the faculty. The ratio between students and faculty with a PhD in information systems is probably the worst of all the IT programs. We have a lot of students in IS and very few professors that actually hold an IS degree, a doctoral IS degree. At the most, I can count 10 professors in Mexico nowadays that have a PhD in information systems. So when Professor Guillermo says that I am probably one of the pioneers in information systems doctoral programs in Mexico, yes, probably because we're still only 10. And probably three of them are either retired or they moved elsewhere or they died. So we are in a crisis, and we don't have. And the worst part is that we're not forming new ones. We don't have them. They came all from overseas. We went outside. We did study a PhD. We came back, and we still don't have a program to create our own. So we're in big problem. The IS programs are taught then by faculty that only have bachelor's degrees or master's degrees, and normally those are in computer science or computer engineering. So do they understand very well the discipline? Not exactly, but they do the hard stuff. Or they are so desperate that they will teach IS auditing or IS strategy without knowing anything about it and being very creative. Uh, Business administration doctoral programs normally do not include a major in IS. So they have finance, they have um, marketing, they have other areas like general accounting and general administration, but not IS. And this is similar or worse in other Latin American countries. For what I've been talking to Professor Guillermo, the situation is not that different in Brazil, even though you do have more academic formation than we do, yet we're far from that optimum state that we wish we were. Now, where do we publish and what incentives do we have to create or to develop the discipline? So incentives for promotion of faculty members in Latin American countries are not very common. And if we find them, they tend to copy what we have in the so-called first world countries. So publish with in some journals that are indexed in certain ways that only please me, right? So we are very rarely going to find any IS outlet that accomplishes or fulfills the requirements that are there for promotion. So we tend to go outside and we tend to publish in American or European journals that are indexed in such a way that are going to count towards promotion for us. And to develop an outlet that completely fulfills the requirements is going to be so hard because you have to let many years pass and build a big reputation before you are even considered for indexing. And you cannot build a reputation if nobody wants to publish with you. So that can be a big issue. As for conferences, as Alexander was saying, in AIS, there is the Americas Conference on Information Systems that it started in Pittsburgh in 1994. It has been done twice in Latin America. Once it was in Acapulco in Mexico 2006. That was the first time I was the chair there. And really, it was a nightmare, but it was very satisfying. And the second time was Martin Santana's edition in Peru, in Lima. And both of them, I can say that distinguished themselves from the others in two ways. First, there were a lot of Spanish-speaking people there. And second, there was the best social events ever in any of the conferences that have taken place in anywhere else in the States. So there was a bid for Rio in 2015, but it was ill prepared and it was not accepted. And Puerto Rico will be hosting 2015, but we can hardly say that Puerto Rico is anymore Latin America. It's like Latin America with money because it's an associate state of the United States. We have, off the record, submitted a bid now, again for Latin America in 2019. And we have invited to submit the preliminary, and probably we will be invited to submit the full bid, and mainly also because I think there are no other people interested in bidding. So that's good. That accelerates our opportunities to organize again a conference in Latin America. It might be Cancun, it might be somewhere else, but it's really sad to see that they always rule out places like Brazil, Argentina, or Chile because they are very far and it would be very expensive for all the Americans to go. And if you think about it, this is an America's conference, not an American conference. And the one single letter makes a big difference. It's not a conference for the US. It's a conference for all the continent. And yet we need to make initiatives that are going to be really, really competitive, not to go to places like Omaha or not to go to places like Sioux Falls or to Indianapolis that are absolutely of no interest to us and come to this region to try to foster interest in the discipline. So it has been a struggle also to find bidders from Latin America. We tend not to want to be involved. So they all say, yeah, let's have another one. But who raises their hand? Nobody. And that's a hard thing to do. Now that we have elected in the chapter, not properly yet, Professor Guillermo as our new president, probably things are going to change in our favor. Right, Alexander? I'm putting you on the spot, I know, but the commitment is very, very strong. There are other conferences that we can always go to that are not exclusively IS, like the Academy of Management or CLADEA for Latin America, the CLAY, the Latin American Center of Informatics. But CLAY, for instance, really the IS discipline is almost ignoring CLAY. They are more computer science and computer engineering oriented, even though they say the contrary. And there are some others that always one can turn to. Journals. This is all. The statistics you're going to be watching on this slide are not the latest. They are like 3 years old. I apologize for that, but I really didn't have any time to update it. But my guess is the status has not changed a lot since, right? So we have Relcasi, which is a journal that we founded for the AIS in Spanish and Portuguese. It's a Latin American journal of the AIS that has been running for now probably 4 years. It has probably 4 issues. It hasn't grown that much. And it's extremely difficult to obtain papers for it. It is a very good outlet for people who are probably, I mean, I know they won't be sending their best work to Relcasi, but they can send decent work, especially decent work that graduate students have done. And it would be a good outlet for them because we need to build the reputation of the journal if we want it to survive. RISTI, which is also a biannual, RESI, which is mainly Brazilian papers, and also an Enlace journal, which is a Venezuelan paper. So there are not a lot of outlets there, and a few of them, and they are all competing against each other. So making sense, or trying to make sense, we have to ask ourselves, Our outlets. I'm sorry for the mistake in the grammar there. Are Latin American outlets really doing any good? And what's a good outlet for the grad students? How can we provide really strengthen what we have to make it really a reliable and requirement fulfilling outlet for professors to publish there? And what is another outlet that would be very good for graduate students that are still trying to get the gears up and running in publishing? If we think about the community, just to put things in perspective, we have the AIS, which is, say, the mother association of IS, even though sometimes we want to go away from it. Uh, that's what it is. And we have the Latin American chapter that we founded back in 2002. Uh, we have a Latin American outreach um, initiative by IIS, and they came to Mexico imagining that we could, just gather the hordes of IS professors and get them to be members of the IS. And their surprise when they came in is to know that they were meeting with probably 15 professors, of which one or two had an IS degree. So no, there were no hordes of professors, and we needed to build a discipline, and that's what we have been trying to do. Back like in 2008 or so, Peru started a chapter of AIS against our advice because we said, why do we need a Peruvian chapter that we haven't been able to strengthen yet the Latin American one? Yet they did it, and now they participate, I guess, a lot more in LACAIS than they do in the Peruvian AIS chapter. And there was also a big initiative once to create a Brazilian chapter. I don't know how that is going. I think it will happen, but Brazil has the numbers. Peru doesn't, and yet they all need to work together and try to make one initiative that is going to really be good. So, what have we done in for the Latin American Caribbean chapter? In 2000, four of us met in Long Beach, and we talked about the need to continue and strengthen the Latin American track in AMSIS. It was already, say, the big result and the big achievement that we have a track about Latin America in AMSIS. This track was in English, but it had to do with issues of anybody publishing issues of IS in Latin America. So it went on a little bit, and back in 2005, that track actually started being in Spanish, and then it also included Portuguese. So they came to Mexico City in 2002. We had a meeting in Mexico City, and we managed to get three institutions to be institutional members, out of which I think only one remains as such. We created the regional chapter, and we bid for AMSIS in Acapulco, and we got it. And so, as I was saying, they tried to attract the army of Mexican IS researchers, and what was pricey was two of us. But it was a great start. It was a great start. At least it was a start, because otherwise it would have been me and Marta, another one that was here, still going to the conferences and publishing one paper and not doing anything for the region. So we gather members of Mexico, Bolivia, Colombia, Venezuela, Uruguay, Peru, Brazil, and Costa Rica. And I put in red Bolivia, Colombia, and Venezuela because they have basically disappeared. And tons of expatriates in the USA, in the UK mainly. We have been legally constituted in Mexico, and we have huge problems to collect funds. Hence, we have huge problems to do anything. But yet, we survive, and we still keep active, and the track is still there, and the journal is still there, and very much, as I was saying once in the panel, it doesn't matter if it's only a few of us, but the point is that we are loud enough to do things, even if it's just a few of us. So the achievements was that the track for Latin America since 2000, the track in Spanish since 2005, tracked in Portuguese since 2007, two AMSs in Latin America, and the best social events, as I was saying. And the journal's struggling to survive, but we have lost impulse. That's why we, again, I say, elected Professor Guillermo to be our new president, our shining armor to make things happen again. Right, Alex? We're on. So what happens in Brazil? It's a community on its own. It's the isolated giant and the great hope. Brazil has a ton of people, and it does have a lot better, a much wider educational system that can give the economies of scale and the numbers that we require. Is the isolated giant because Brazil always tends to do its own events, its own conferences, and when they go out to the States or they go out to Europe. So we need to integrate Brazil into Latin America, and we need to gain from the experience that Brazil has. What are the challenges in doing so? That we have no common ground for incentives or no motivation to collaborate. We have a lack of researchers and professors with a PhD in the field. We have a difficult for coordination at a distance, which is something that we are breaking ground right now. So the challenge is to integrate Brazil overall, to enhance, to better the quality of the outlets for all levels that we have, for grad students or for consolidated researchers, and to do significant research for regional development. I'm going to come back to this point in a minute, but significant research for regional development is something that we should always keep in mind. And another one of our big challenges in Latin America is that we don't have critical mass. We don't have the numbers. We have to create the numbers, and there have been some uh, initiatives put forward to create this. Back in a few years ago, we started in the chapter an initiative to create a Latin American doctoral degree. What was this? In other words, we're trying, knowing that no single institution in Latin America had what it took to make a big or a really good PhD program in IS, because we only have one or two professors, because we don't have the resources and we cannot attract enough number of students. We thought, okay, we count the numbers of all of us, we're probably 20. 20 is not a bad number. And then if we attract the big names from the AIS, and we create a doctoral program that is distributed in all the region, with the big names in AIS in English, and with us, the 20 of us or 25, mentoring and tutoring locally, then we have a big quality information systems PhD program that will benefit everybody in the region, independently of where they are. So we put forward that initiative in AIS. It was very well received, but it was not very well supported. When you think that you require a certain number of resources, and those resources I don't think were too much. Yet it was not probably the priority of the overall association to bring the Latin Americans into a doctoral regional program. I still think that's a very good idea, and I still think it's very feasible, and it's doable, and it's something that we should think about, because we could all benefit from the talent that we have distributed throughout the Latin American subcontinent. What opportunities do we have? Industry is calling us. Even though the discipline, academically speaking, is struggling, in the industry, there's no doubt of the need for talent in our area. And we have a lot of emerging disciplines that can be of a lot of use for this. Globalization is also an opportunity issue, and that gives place also to funding, global funding like the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank, etc. I said that integrating Brazil was a challenge, but integrating Brazil is also an opportunity. There's always a dual side for all things. So we need to start building common grounds and shortening distances, like we're doing right now with this conference, and we're doing right now with ISLA, which is distributed somehow, and it's a very good pilot of what we can achieve and do when we want to grow this for Latin America. This is a great way of starting, and I congratulate you on that. Now, another question, what are we doing research on? Well, first rule, I'm doing research on what's important for my advisor. I'm doing research on what was important for my advisor when I was a PhD student, because then I created a career in that. Or I'm doing research on what I like, which is okay. But then, what I like doesn't make it relevant. I'm also doing research on what is trendy and what will be of interest for the editors that will eventually publish me. So I see all the trends right now, like cloud computing, mobile, big data, consumerization, social media, so on and so forth. All the big words of the trendy stuff. Uh, Now we have to question: is that really what we need to be doing? And do we need to target the same topics that internationally researchers are targeting? Are we equally interested in those topics as Americans or English or French or Germans would be? I know there are topics that are common of interest overall, of course. Yet, which ones are the ones that are going to be of more impact for the community that I live at? And that's one thing that we need to consider. Let's, for example, look at MIS Quarterly, volume 38 of 2014. This is the latest one that I could find that was not a special issue on something. So that I could get a good thermometer on what topics are being accepted in the top IS journal that everybody dreams about publishing in. Digital innovation as a fundamental and powerful concept in all the information systems curriculum. Okay, so this is oriented towards education. Data collection in the digital age. Innovative alternatives to student samples. So in other words, how do I stop doing student samples for my research, which is something that we all do? Okay, sounds interesting. Is a research article. The nature and consequences of trade-off transparency in the context of recommendation agents. Can anyone please do me the favor of translating what this is about? Because I have no idea, but it sounds really fancy, right? And I probably need to read it like 4 or 5 times more in order to get an idea of what it might be about before seeing the abstract. It's not something that is going to strike me as, wow, I want to read this, right? Trust satisfaction and online repurchase intention. The moderating role of perceived effectiveness of e-commerce institutional mechanism. Okay, this is about purchasing behavior in e-commerce, but it sounds so boring, doesn't it? Probably if I'm really into it, probably I'll be excited. But my question is, we spend so much time and resources developing our publishing skills, developing our ability to write and convince editors, and we try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, and then try and succeed. And finally, at the end of our career, we manage to publish one thing in MIS Quarterly, and nobody reads it. So all the effort I made is for nobody to read it. And I'm a big critic of the big journals and the big targets that everybody has in the, say, orthodox IS career or academic career. The point is, did you change anybody's life by the research you did? Or just yours because you finally published an MIS Quarterly? I don't know. It's something that we need to think about, because really, I don't know what the topics should be. But what's relevant for development? We need not to forget that we are in countries that require a lot of development. And if we do not acknowledge our origins, we are really being irresponsible on what we can do to foster a better life for those around us. I mean, we are the ones that have the highest level of education in our community. We are the ones, hence, with the highest responsibility. I know we're not the government, but I'm sure we have much more powerful tools to foster development than our current politicians do. So, what's relevant for development? Probably, just thinking out loud, innovation environments. How do I foster, or how do I create innovation environments that will lead to economical spillover and will better the life of the people around us? Small and medium businesses, we know that they are about 50% of the productivity in our nations. We can't let them be technology ignorant. How do we make them more competitive against the cost-effective Chinese? Building IT skills, very important. We know that everything that has to do with competitiveness and development has a direct relationship to capabilities, ability of the people. IT for social development, and so on and so forth. We can think of many things, but I give you the responsibility of thinking in your community. What would be the most relevant topic rather than what is the one that is going to get me into publishing quickly? There's a study that we have been doing for several years with Jerry Luffman and many other researchers worldwide. And we tend to compare what is the trends, what are the trends in IT management, what are the concerns that IT CIOs have in organizations, and what are the top technologies that they're looking at. And it's very interesting to see differences in regions and also differences in time over time. So this is still in process of publishing, so it's off the record. But the trend studies for 2014 says the main topics that CIOs and people from the industry are interested in is alignment on IT of IT and with the business agility, IT time to market, business cost reduction and controls, business productivity. Those are the top five. So if people around the world are saying these are the top five relevant issues, then we should probably be doing research on those top five relevant issues rather than those that I think that might be relevant for industry. If industry is telling me this is what I care about, then what am I doing to improve their understanding and management of those topics? So if I want relevant things, I need to think as a CIO. Now, if we think about Latin America, the Latin American scenario for this study is quite ill methodologically speaking because it only includes samples from Mexico and Peru. Yet, it gives a good thermometer that these top five issues are just about the same as for the Latin American. The things that change is probably what is in second is in third, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, if you look at the top 10, you will look at those that are of interest for the Latin American community for the in industry. Now, what are the top technologies that I should be looking at in my research? Analytics and business intelligence. And it doesn't surprise me. If I was saying that one of my main concerns is business agility, I have to think of business intelligence. Application software development is an always important thing for CIOs. Data center and infrastructure. Data center and infrastructure is interesting because he has come back this year after being absent in many years before. Cloud computing and software as a service and infrastructure as a service, so on and so forth, and ERPs, CRM, big data, all those things that have to do with the top technologies. So if we're doing something in our research that addresses these technologies, we're probably on the right path. Okay. So for the main thing, in other words, what research should I be doing in Latin America that is important for social development in Latin America? That addresses the main concerns of managers in Latin America in IT, and that addresses the top technologies that managers say that are important for their daily functioning. So what's next? We need to do research that actually matters. That's the whole thing. We need to strengthen outlets that are from the region. We need to establish networking and collaboration opportunities. And we need to bring big conferences to Latin America and also strengthen the ones that we have and make them more international. We need to strengthen the discipline. So how do we strengthen the discipline? We need to create economies of scale with the faculty resources that we have. And creating economies of scale in programs like the one I mentioned about the PhD program, then we can probably increase the number of PhDs and faculty members with a PhD that we already have. So target issues that matter and somebody will sponsor the work. That's an important thing. That's an important issue. If I can grab and I can get a sense on what really is important, believe me, there will be a client for it. And there will be somebody interested in sponsoring my research work. And I don't have to be suffering on how to do it. Networking, and then networking. Getting to know each other is the best way of building common projects. And there's no other way. So you have to get involved. You have to go outside. You have to get into the associations. You have to go into the discussion lists. You have to start looking for birds of a feather. That means somebody who has the same interest that I do have. I have to overcome distance barriers, and that's quite easy with the technology we have now. We have to fulfill agreements for collaboration. And I say fulfill, not because, okay, all our universities go and visit each other and they do agreements, and nobody takes advantage of such agreements. So we need to know what we have and we need to take advantage of it. Otherwise, what's the point? There's now, and I put it down there, an agreement that has just been signed, or a memo of understanding, between the National University of Mexico, the University of Sao Paulo, and the University of Buenos Aires, because they are macro universities, and as such, they want to develop many projects. So this is a big opportunity for everybody else to join through either one of these universities and do something that is going to be really good. I don't know. There are many things that I can keep on talking about. So I will let you talk about it, ask any questions, or tell me just to go home. I'm at home, so just to disconnect and to forget about the whole thing. So muito obrigado a vocês.